Happy Thursday, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Today we have two absolute titans, and we cannot wait to hear from them and pick their brains. But first, my name is Andrew Whipp, and I'm the lead creative and editor at Green Buzz Agency. I'm also joined by my very good friend and colleague, Amelia Oliver, the marketing strategist here at Green Buzz. Amelia, how are you?
I'm doing well, Andrew. Super excited to co-host with you today and to dive right in. We have such a cool and exciting session, so I can't wait.
Absolutely, yeah. It's going to be a lot of fun, but as a quick aside, if any of our audience members ended up here and don't know who we are or what we do, Green Buzz Agency is a full-service video production company, and we are based out of Old Town Alexandria, and we specialize in documentary, motion graphics, and branded content. So if you or your teams are curious about the process of making a video or are looking to tell your own story, then do not hesitate to reach out. But bringing it back around, today's webinar is our 14th in our Green Buzz Agency webinar series, which we created to connect our community with thought leaders who can help us break down top-line strategy, best practices, and advice during the pandemic. So if you'd like to check out any of our previous episodes, please feel free to visit greenbuzzagency.com/blogs. There will be a ton of on-demand recordings there of all the episodes we've done, which include strategies and ideas from executives at Twitter and Quibi, PBS, Sotheby's, Make-A-Wish, NASCAR, and many, many more. But today, we're going to be focusing on human behavior and forecasting consumer trends during uncertainty. So if you're looking to stay ahead of the curve, then you are in the right place. And now it is time for our introductions. Today we are joined by Annie Granatstein and Gabriella Mirabelli. Annie is the EVP Creative Newsroom Director at Edelman and one of Folio's 2019's top women in media. Before joining Edelman, Annie served as the head of the Washington Post brand studio, the Washington Post in-house creative agency. Annie has also launched multimedia campaigns for iconic brands like Coca-Cola, MasterCard, Hulu, AT&T, and Mercedes. Her work has been recognized across the industry with accolades from the Webbies to the Tellys and DigiDays. And Gabriella is the host of the Up Next podcast and a Voice Network contributor for Adweek. Previously, she was the EVP of Consumer Insights and Brand Strategy at Valence Media. And prior to that, Gabriella was the CEO and co-founder of Anatomy, a strategic consultancy and Emmy-winning creative services agency that served world-class entertainment brands. Gabriella's research on young adults' media consumption behaviors has been cited in Forbes, The Wrap, Media Post, and Yahoo Finance. Thank you both very, very much for swinging by today, and thank you for being willing to share your insights and experiences with us during this pandemic. And I'm really looking forward to getting into the weeds with you guys on all that stuff. So with that out of the way, let's jump right in. Annie, I will pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me today. I have to confess, this is my first webinar since the pandemic, my first public presentation since the pandemic. So I'm pretty excited. So I wanted to talk today about something I'm calling storytelling whiplash. Something that we're dealing with a lot at Edelman, and I'm sure a lot of you are dealing with, is how fast content has to change to meet this, ever-changing landscape that we're in right now, where it feels like the news and what's going on is just changing constantly. I say every hour here, but sometimes it feels like every minute, every second. And it's really hard to keep up, not just for those of us that are creating content, but just for the average consumer and reader of content. So here's just a sense of what we're all experiencing with the news cycle moving faster and faster. And, another trend alongside the accelerating news cycle is that mistrust in the media has never been greater. So Edelman does this study every few months to measure people's trust in different institutions, including the media. And what they found this year is an increase in distrust. So people over 50% are saying that the media they use are contaminated with untrustworthy information. 3/4 are worried about false information or fake news being used as a weapon, which is a 6-point increase since 2018. So a lot of distrust out there. So, how do brands deal with this quickly moving news cycle and the rampant distrust in media and in content? And they need to earn trust, and they also need to move really, really quickly. I wanted to say this in a big way, but how? Because brands generally don't move very quickly. They have a lot of stakeholders, a lot of different opinions. It's hard to get things through approvals quickly. It's something that, all of us who are content marketers are dealing with all the time, but it's even more important now that we figure out hacks around the slow moving brand machine. So I'm going to talk a lot about that, about how to be relevant, but and also how to move quickly in the next few slides. So first, it's really important to know your audience deeply. I would say this is more important than ever before. What your audience is caring about, what they are interacting with, all of that is changing so rapidly. And it's really important to go beyond the superficial, to go deep into this. So better data. So something that we're doing is we've created something called the Earned Signal platform. So importantly, we want to look at how people are engaging with content across the web. So we're not just looking at how they're engaging with advertising, but how are they engaging with articles across the web, across publishers, and really going deep with that beyond transactions, interpreting conversations between people, identifying what they care about, not just what they care about with respect to your brand, but what do they care about in general? What social issues do they care about? What are they advocating about? And then tracking their sphere of influence, like not just their follower accounts, but what is that influential circle that they are writing to, they are engaging with, and that they are influencing. So then we want to take that data to inform your content, to inform the topics that you're tackling and how you're tackling them. And you want to then launch content early and often. So I'm going to get into kind of like how we're moving quickly. So a few things that we're doing is we're trying to use public or existing assets as much as possible so that we're not recreating every time we need to say something, every time we want to communicate. We are looking at conducting flash polling. Actually, just for the first time, had this greenlit for a client yesterday. Very excited. What that is that we're creating these online focus groups, and then we're asking them questions continuously and getting stats and data from those flash polls and using those to seed to media, but also as content. And then we are really leaning into reusable storytelling templates. So it's not something new with the pandemic and with the fast moving news cycle, but we're leaning into it more than ever. I'm going to show you a lot of examples of this so that we can move really, really quickly and just swap out colors and styles and words, but have this template that's ready to go as soon as the news hits and we want to say something relevant. So the point of all this is to really earn our way into the announcements of the brand, the experiences, the launches, the campaigns, and build communities and conversations and trust along the way. So we're taking this very incremental approach to content, responsive approach to content. I'm going to show you a lot of examples of this. So here's an example for iShares, which is part of BlackRock. And we're calling this quick storytelling at scale. So iShares wanted to stand out from its competitors with fast turn content that connects to current financial concerns. So at this point during the pandemic, obviously the market is extremely volatile. There's also a lot of focus on sustainable investing. So what we did was we created a library of animated visual assets. And again, this is like that storytelling template. You'll understand what I mean when I show you a bunch of examples. But these are attention grabbing GIFs and animations where we can just swap out visuals, swap out copy, swap out colors, depending on what it is that we want to say at that moment that'll be relevant to investors, and boil complex financial concepts down to these very short, understandable stories that add context to these financial trends. And what we found is that when we use this library of assets across paid and social channels, we drove much deeper engagement than before and a consistent look and feel across iShares channels. So you can see an example of what I'm talking about when I say a library of animations where we can swap out the visuals, swap out the messaging, swap out the iconography to get across different messages. And you can picture how we can move extremely quickly once we've created this template. In a day, we can create, maybe even within hours, we can come up with a new version that relates to what's going on right then in the investors' lives, in their social feeds. So in a different category and a very different execution, I wanted to talk about what we've done for HP. We're calling modern executive storytelling. So The goal here was to reinvent HP storytelling and thought leadership, really portraying the brand as modern, relevant, and future-looking amidst the pandemic. And to do that, we had to leverage the expertise of HP's executives. This was really a LinkedIn-focused campaign to elevate their executive visibility in a modern, relevant, and future-looking way. So we used COVID-19 as a springboard for future-looking topics, what's coming next amidst the uncertainty, positioning HP as a leader in work-from-home technology and workforce connectivity, obviously huge topics for their audience right now. And then very importantly, we wanted to enhance these LinkedIn posts with dynamic animations. So what we did was we created this almost daily creation cycle, capitalizing on rapidly changing news, to give you a sense of what that means in terms of volume. In the first 2 weeks, and this is in the spring, really the height of the pandemic, 12 plus short form LinkedIn posts amplified the company's response to the virus. 6 plus long form LinkedIn articles from each of their executives positioning HP as a leader in work from home technology and workforce connectivity. So 18 pieces of content in the first 2 weeks of this campaign. And because it's not that fun to look at articles, I wanted to show you some of the animations that we created to enhance these LinkedIn posts and articles. These ones really relate to the work from home, connectivity, and technology topics. And again, we created them in a way that we could reuse and swap in and out visuals. So another very different campaign, and I want to talk a little bit how it evolved during COVID. This didn't start during the pandemic, but has been evolved during the pandemic. This is for Dove, and it's really all about having a timely, relevant social purpose program. Dove has a very long-standing commitment to anti-hair discrimination and body positivity. Some of you may have heard of what Dove has done on these topics, and they needed to follow through on that during this time when discrimination in general and equality is at the top of more conversations. And we wanted to do it with responsive social content. So something happens in the news, somebody's discriminated against, there's something to congratulate and to honor. We wanted to be able to move very, very quickly to do that. And ultimately, this work really had a massive reputational uptick for Dove. In fact, the Crown Act, which is their anti-hair discrimination legislation, has been passed in a number of states because of Dove's work. And they were also the financing and support behind the Hair Love short that won an Oscar. Overall, this campaign for Dove has been incredibly successful. But here's just a couple social examples. So the one on the left is pre-pandemic. This had to do with the very first all-female spacewalk. So when news like this starts hitting, we're able to move very quickly, congratulating the astronauts with a visual, fun, animated GIF here, a giant leap for womankind. And then on the right, this is post-pandemic, this is very recent, during Latinx Heritage Month, which is right now. Dove partnered with influencers. In this case, she's a Black Latina influencer. And her post here, really interesting, is about this false choice between Black or Dominican and kind of embracing the beauty in having these different heritages. So just a sense of how they're kind of entering conversations with what's relevant to their audience right now. That's it for me. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm very happy to answer any of your questions in the Q&A session at the end.
Awesome. I think now would be a great time for us to pass it over to Gabriella, and I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for watching, and I'm thrilled to be here with Annie. If there's a theme for the webinar today and in the world in which we're living, it's acceleration. So let's walk through some data to drive home this point. One of the big milestones that companies talk about is reaching an audience of 50 million. So I'm going to walk through how long it took various things to hit that magic audience number. First, radio, 38 years. Next, TV, 13 years. Instagram, 19 months. And Pokemon Go, 19 days. It isn't your imagination. Things are changing quickly, and the rate of change is accelerating. Life today is lived at warp speed, and that's before COVID. COVID has taken what was already a fast-moving environment and strapped on a jetpack. One aspect of this trend to note is that the acceleration is a reflection of the evolution of technology. From broadcast TV and radio, where the curation of information and the method of delivery of that information was unidirectional and consolidated, to cable, where it felt like it was tailored for the viewer because there was a network for everything, but it was still centrally controlled and directed. The pipes of discovery were limited and centrally controlled. And contrast that with today, where everyone is a network of one. We edit our own news and program our own music and playlists. There is still some push at the audience, but it is largely pull. And moreover, what is pushed at us is informed and shaped by an algorithm that learns what we pull, what we share, what we respond to. We have undergone a shift from mass media to my media. The function of sharing for humans isn't new. The network effect of information distribution has been around for a very long time. And a simple illustration of the network effect can be found in a shampoo commercial from the 1980s. So let's play that commercial.
When I first tried Fabergé Organic shampoo with pure wheat germ oil and honey, it was so good I told 2 friends about it, and they told 2 friends, and so on, and so on, and so on. And believe me, there's still nothing like the original Fabergé Organic. It gives me super shine, super body,
and super fresh smelling hair.
Try it, and you'll tell your friends about it.
So that's the network effect in action. And what's important to realize is that the advertisement was created in the 80s, before the internet was in everyone's home. They were describing the network effect, and they were using it to create a sense of pre-digital FOMO. Social media has amplified the network effect and powered it. It also means something a lot of brands forget. Most people view brand content not because they went to the brand channel. They see it because a friend exposed it to them in theirs. But so what? How is it helpful? It's important because it demonstrates a simple and powerful human behavior that relates to other human behaviors that have evolved over time. These behaviors are durable. They did not arrive with the internet. They predate it. They are robust. They are less changeable than algorithms and have adapted to survive through plagues. It's important to understand the why of human behavior so that you can then place that behavior into the context of today. See how the tech, social constraints, and pressures relate to human behaviors so that you can anticipate how people will behave in a given situation, and this will allow you to harness that behavior. So let's review some foundational human behaviors and then put them into context. We covered the network effect, but what motivated that woman to share about her wonderful shampoo, and so on and so on? There are biological and social reasons. Biologically speaking, our brains actually light up when we share and when we receive information. It feels good. The section of the brain that lights up, the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, is the part of our brain that integrates multiple different inputs and assigns value to them. Humans are hardwired to want to share, but they don't just want to share anything. They want to share things of value because that gave them a biological advantage. So what is valuable? Survival. What helps us to survive? Our community. How do we bind ourselves with our community? By helping it. Sharing things of value helps humans to stay alive because it helps solidify our place in the community. The evolutionary biological power of community cannot be overstated. People will disregard facts if they are in conflict with the ideas of their community. Helping community is rewarded. The same region of the brain that encodes non-social and social rewards and punishment, it's the same. You need this shampoo. If you think about the 2016 Russian election interference, it started with anti-vaccination posts. And the reason they did that was they wanted to build a community of people who were suspicious of government and traditional authority. And they created that community, and then they could amplify the messages and the sharing. So what's going on when we share? When we're sharing, we are me forming. The line from that Rolling Stone song, Satisfaction, a man comes on the television, tells me how white my shirts could be, but he can't be a man because he doesn't smoke the same cigarettes as me. Now, in this case, the cigarette brand is the social group. And psychologists call this form of impression management identity signaling, when we share information to express an identity. And those people who are influencers, social brokers, interpersonal contagions are in synchronicity with their networks of people, and their messages are received as valuable information. It amplifies the messaging. This is why influencers are effective. And this is also where it matters for brands. It's understanding identity. And Annie was talking about her platform earlier and understanding her consumers. That is why it's so important. It's understanding identity and how it relates to the consumer. A few years ago, MTV posted this Simon Sinek video on millennials and digital behavior. Now, this viral went video, and a lot of videos go viral, but this one elegantly illustrates some of the reasons why videos go viral in the first place. So let's play the video.
The generation that we call the millennials, they were told that they were special all the time. They were told that they could have anything they want in life, just because they want it. So you take this group, and they graduate school, and they get a job, they find out they're not special, their moms can't get them a promotion, and by the way, you can't just have it because you want it. And in an instant, their entire self-image is shattered. And so you have an entire generation that's growing up with lower self-esteem than previous generations. We're growing up in a Facebook, Instagram world. In other words, we're good at putting filters on things. We're good at showing people that life is amazing even though I'm depressed. Now, let's add in technology. Engagement with social media and our cell phones releases a chemical called dopamine. That's why when you get a text, it feels good. It's why we count the likes. It's because we know when you get it, you get a hit of dopamine, which feels good. Dopamine is the exact same chemical that makes us feel good when we smoke, when we drink. In other words, it's highly, highly addictive. Too many kids don't know how to form deep, meaningful relationships. They will admit that many of their friendships are superficial, that they don't count on their friends. They have fun with their friends, but they also know that their friends will cancel on them as something better comes along. So when significant stress starts to show up in their lives, they're not turning to a person, they're turning to a device. Now you add in the sense of impatience. Right? They've grown up in a world of instant gratification. You want to go on a date, you don't even have to learn how to be like, hey. You don't have to swipe right. Bang, I'm a stud. Everything you want, you can have instantaneously, except job satisfaction and strength of relationships. There ain't no app for that. And so what this young generation needs to learn is patience. That some things that really, really matter, like love or job fulfillment, joy, all of these things take time.
Okay, so that video was so successful and went viral because it did several things. It signaled for social bonding. In group or out group, people have strong emotions around generational differences, especially around millennials, especially right then. So it activated multiple groups. And it then contained information that at the time was new and also easy to understand. So it would be perceived as beneficial to one's perceived group to share the video. And these two things combined to trigger the third elusive element, which would be an anticipated bump in self-esteem. Because if you have those first two elements, it's more likely that if you post it, it's going to be liked, reshared, and commented on. And that improves your self-esteem as the poster. It's that dopamine bump. Of course, identities are not just demographic categories like age, race, or gender. They can also be things people choose. And these identities of choice can be very powerful. Fandom is really the holy grail of engagement. So let's think about the brands that have some fans. Let's show them. North Face, Patagonia, Supreme, Apple, Nike, Tesla, sports franchises. Go Liverpool. So think back on that Simon Sinek MTV video. One of the reasons it was successful beyond identity signaling was the information. And this is not only because it enriches one's own knowledge base, but also because it is perceived as potentially valuable to the group and likely to be well received when shared. Infotainment is wildly popular on social media because people enjoy learning if the information is relevant, presented concisely, and entertaining. Hands and pans videos are the perfect way to think about this. Almost everyone has watched, saved, tried, and shared at least one of these videos. Solving what I'm going to do to chicken tonight has great social currency. Digital publishers that excel on social like Vox and Vice understand this motivator. But it's something that's available to other brands too. Content that is helpful and responds to community needs can be very well received. For instance, COVID happened. Time realized that homeschooling was a huge pain point that they could solve for. They repurposed their classroom materials for parents and they pushed them out globally, building their brand in a phenomenal way, in a very relevant way, in a very authentic way. People are also driven to share emotional stories because that helps deepen their bonds with others. The entire entertainment ecosystem is built on understanding this. If you really pay attention to what's sticky in people's feeds, you'll notice that emotional content travels a lot farther. Think about those Dove posts that Annie put up, and you think about how people feel about their identities and how emotional that is. The more human-centric we can make our content, the more people will identify with it. Emotion provides the basis for reason. Emotions power decisions. When people suffer a brain injury to the part of the brain that regulates emotion, it results in people who cannot make decisions. Emotions beat facts. Emotions are sticky and they travel. Within the emotional realm, we're also hardwired to respond to polarized valence. And basically, what that means is we gravitate to extremely negative or extremely positive content. And this tendency is rooted in survival. That berry is going to kill me. The lions sleep over there. Pollyanna got eaten by the lion or got sick from the berries. So there's a reason why glass is half empty a lot of the time. It was a survival thing. So we've covered why people engage with content and share content. So enter COVID, external factor. And there are two major trends as it relates to consumers: accelerated acceleration and depression and post-traumatic stress behavior. The trend in retail was to move from in real life to digital. COVID made this movement from the physical world into the digital and virtual one happen overnight. So all of our in real life bag of tricks went by the wayside, and we needed to really lean into how human behaviors manifest in the digital world. And into this mix, we add how people who evolved to deal with a world of scarcity handle the volume of information. And how they do that is they always seek to simplify the complexity of their purchasing decision. And in retail, you can combine all of these things and just call it sort of shoppability. The online experience is the retail experience. Digital shopping was already happening, and it is not going away. With online shopping more competitive than ever, getting the basic elements right is key. And remember, people can search and compare online swiftly and easily. So this means looking at how to make shopping a social experience, either by embedding social aspects or leaning into retail on social platforms. Social platforms are the marketplaces where people can be social, make purchases that help them feel in group. It also means AR to power consumers' ability to try things on. People might not think that activism and retail are closely linked, but thanks to human behaviors, they are. Remember, consumers are now online and they're cycling, evaluating, looking for reasons to simplify their purchase decision. It's a lot like HR, screening resumes. They look for reasons to dump out or jump in with a brand. This means that brand activism is something that consumers are paying attention to. When surveyed, young consumers had only one strong no-go area for brands, and that was political endorsements and donations. So what about anxiety and post-traumatic stress? How will and is this impacting people? What we're seeing is an uptick in purchases for products and services that help with self-care, things that address the emotional, spiritual, psychological, or physical needs are being purchased. Longer term, we may see new behaviors around live experiences. We see people wanting to do things that allow them to be actively social in a physically present way, like eating out. Humans are animals, and they're animals of group, and they like to be with people, so they want that. But we also see them avoiding things like movies and theater. We had Tenet release, it did not do well in theaters. So it's hard to tell right now what it will look like. There were some scientific studies conducted in Canada with regard to how consumers behaved after SARS, and there was evidence of experiences that may have been triggering, like crowds, causing people to pull back. And this is something we need to continue to survey on. At the start of the pandemic, I had been looking at China and Italy for signals, but as our response has diverged from theirs, we really need to just continue to watch the data, because we may have a more extreme reaction here in the States. So that's it for me, and I'd like to hand off back to Amelia and Andrew for Q&A.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to kick things off with a question for Annie. You had talked about earlier in your presentation launching content early and often. And I was curious, how do you find that balance between putting out too much content or not enough? Because I've found personally that when I'm scrolling through my email or when I'm on different digital media platforms or whatever, and I feel like a brand's too in my face, it almost like gives me an averse reaction to that, versus, you also want to be relevant and be in their consciousness. So how do you straddle that line? How do you, work with your clients to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that you don't want to have frequency for frequency's sake, I think that's when it would get annoying because, people can kind of read through what a brand's trying to achieve. And if it starts to feel like they're just like hitting me up constantly, I'm just seeing, messaging from them all the time with not like a deeper reason behind it, I think it can be quite annoying and can have the opposite effect that a brand is intending. So I would, say that what you want is to always take an outside in approach, look at what's going on in your audience's lives, in their world, on their feeds, and in the news that they're engaging with, and look for those moments that the brand actually has some value to add to the conversation, to the news, to the event, by adding context, by adding a support. So I think it's important that it's not brand out, inside out, but it's outside in, and that will lead you to the right frequency of content.
Yeah, that's great. And I actually have kind of a similar question about leaning into the conversation. And I think much of this presentation has been about how do you kind of tap into these news cycles and stay relevant. And something that I'm kind of wondering, and this maybe is for you, Gabriella, from more of a behavioral perspective, is how do you factor things in like counter programming and news fatigue or COVID fatigue that we might be experiencing right now? I know we at Greenbuzz have done a video for Cricket Wireless that was a very super successful. I think it had over 30 million views, and it was so successful because it was airing right when the 2016 election results had come out. And it was just a very positive, feel-good story that had nothing to do with the election. I think similarly, we're kind of at a moment where there's just such an influx of things happening. So how do you factor in things like counter-programming into your brand narrative?
Well, I think that what you're getting there for right now is self-care and how people are managing their own mental health. And it's just an overload. And so how do you appeal to their particular pain point and anxiety? And so it depends on what the brand is, how you would counter that. I think that human emotion positive, something that feels good, that is a counterweight, is something that's going to be effective.
Absolutely. I was curious too, like Gabriella, during your presentation, you talked about how over time, all these different options and pipelines have started to arise. And I know that back in the day, you used to hear TV shows when there's 4 channels would get these insane ratings and numbers. And slowly over the years, as more options have come out for people to consume media, those numbers have gone down as a whole. But then what's also interesting is in your kind of like 50 million example, I believe it was, when you had pointed out that, Pokemon Go, I think was 19 days to get there, and Instagram, like each iteration is getting faster and faster and faster. That kind of flies in the face of the stuff that you hear about traditional TV and how back when there was no options, everyone kind of watched the same stuff. And that's why the numbers were so high. But now we're seeing the numbers high once again, and there's more options than there's ever been for things to watch and content to watch. Why do you think that is?
Well, you're doing a little apples and oranges, right? Because you're comparing a television audience with a television audience when you're saying, well, in the old days, it was a television audience got 50 million. And now, gosh, if anybody got even remotely like that, it would just be insane. Blow you away. It'd be insane. Yeah. But what you've got is there are more choices. And so you're comparing the 50 million is still achieved. It's just achieved in a different way. You're having a pull, a choice. And so it's not that people are not engaging with content. It's just they're not engaging with mass media televised content because they have another choice. A lot of media networks tend to think about their competitive set. Let's say it's Lifetime and it thinks about its competitive set as We. But their competitive set is everything. Their competitive set is going to dinner. Their competitive set is everything you can do with your free time. We're in an attention economy, and there's a multiplicity of things you can do. And so you really need to appeal to what's important to the consumer, to understand your consumer, to understand your viewer, so that you speak to them.
Yeah, and I think along those lines about understanding the consumer and who you're speaking to, I think Annie's slide was great talking about creating and leveraging better data. And just wondering, Annie, if you have advice for maybe any smaller brands that aren't really working with intense third-party softwares to gain this kind of data, are there ways that they can use, analytics that are built into certain platforms to get a better understanding of their audience?
I think there are. I think the important thing is that to kind of go deep beyond the numbers. That's a bit what I was getting at is like, you have these data feeds and you have to think a little more deeply. And so I think what's important is to have really, even if you can't afford the expensive third party software relationships or partnerships, like, do you have someone on your team that really knows how to analyze the data and kind of go beyond the numbers to get at that emotion and what is really intended and that sentiment that Gabriella was talking about. So, it's a lot about having really smart analytics.
Well, and if I can just add on there, a lot of times you can drown in data. There's a lot of data which is yesterday's weather report. And so simply purchasing it isn't necessarily, for the smaller business, it's about being smart. It's about the insight, and it's about the one piece that may tell you where things are going. So it's really about sort of building that team that can ferret out there is a certain amount of public information, and they can also understand who's purchasing, who's making that purchase. They can understand how the sales process works, how it, cycles. It's not just a straight line funnel, and it cycles between evaluation and, understanding and how it works. So the insight piece is so critical. It's not just lots of information. And I think that's what Annie was getting at. It's beyond the data point. You can fall in love with data, but it won't necessarily get you where you want to go.
Speaking of data, Annie, when you were chatting about animated GIFs and the success that you've seen with those and kind of drawing people's attention and also having them be very malleable, I can see a lot of pros in that regard. But how does it compare to more traditional forms of advertising and marketing, like a video ad or something to catch somebody's attention? What circumstances would you recommend to clients they choose that kind of dynamic GIFs, if you will, versus videos? Like, what in your mind or your team's mind would be the right situation to go with one or the other?
So I think a lot of what was behind the things that I showed was speed. So in a lot of those programs, especially the iShares example and the HP example, which are very animation heavy, the client wanted to be able to move really, really quickly to respond to things that are going on a daily or weekly basis. So animation was chosen partially because we're able to create this animation template and then swap things out to have different messaging as things happen. I mean, that, like I said, that can be done potentially in hours. Whereas if you're going to go shoot a video, there are definitely ways to move quickly on that, but not as quickly.
Right.
So a lot of that was driven by speed. But I think that there's other considerations, if you put speed aside. Do you have a compelling visual live action situation on your hands? Is there a person who is charismatic that you really want to get on camera, whether that's someone within the company or an influencer that the company works with, or a story, a subject in a story that the brand wants to highlight? Is there something, visually interesting about seeing either that person or their environment or not? And if not, then animation can be a good way to kind of hack it and provide something visually interesting. I think that that's probably the primary consideration other than speed. But, there are things you can do with video to really speed it up. I mean, something that we've done is, if we have a brand that, and this really happened during the pandemic when people are locked down, if they have a lot of executives that they want to get the word out to increase their visibility, we've actually sent those executives gear to be able to record themselves, kind of turning their executives into media personalities in a sense, and so that they're ready to go. So when the news hits, we can kind of pipe into that executive's home office and have them shoot video at our direction really, really quickly. So there are ways to speed video up as well.
Yeah. We've also found too that with graphics, they can be very, very handy for, if you don't have something as visually compelling, or you're a software company, or you do something kind of complicated, that would be a good instance where you could use motion graphics to kind of break down in a more simplistic way, which you talked about, something that audiences can digest a little bit easier.
Definitely.
And Annie, have you ever had a situation when you've been working with a brand and let's say you have your lean content kind of template set up and the news has just hit and you're thinking about posting something or working with a campaign, and then you decide actually it's a better moment for this brand not to kind of engage in that particular news cycle? Can you just walk us through a little bit about what the conversations look like about whether you should or shouldn't be involved in a particular news cycle?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, for sure that we're always thinking about whether this is a moment where the brand should be saying something or not. So, and constantly evaluating that. I think that we first want to make sure that there's a couple things. One is, can the brand add value? We want to have that feeling that the brand's just kind of like jumping on the bandwagon, not actually adding any value to the conversation. So you got to really watch out for that, and there's different kinds of value. You can add value by explaining something, like you were just saying, that's complicated, breaking it down for people. You can add value by showing that there's support for something that's really important. And then the other thing I'd say is it core to the brand's DNA? Like, does it make sense for the brand to be commenting, joining this conversation, supporting, explaining this topic? For Dove, it has been a really core part of their DNA to be dealing with these issues of body positivity and hair discrimination for a long, long time. So it's clear when news hits on those topics that they have a legitimate voice that has been built up over a long period of time. So that's the other thing to watch out for is will people think that it makes sense for this brand, or that it feels a little awkward for this brand to be saying something about this topic? And then, obviously some brands have just total watch outs. Like they don't want to go anywhere near certain topics. I mean, that's an important thing to kind of really delve into with the brand you're working with. Like, what are those watch outs? What are those topics they won't go anywhere near? Sometimes you might have to push that a little bit. Like maybe there is a way for them to enter a conversation that they thought would reflect badly on them. And maybe there's a way they can do it that doesn't reflect badly on them. So, I think you have to kind of work with them on that list, but it is important to find out what kind of the red zones are.
Well, and one of the things that's interesting in terms of the surveys around brand activism and how young consumers, at least those 13 to 39, are behaving is that cohort really believes that there are very few things that are off the table and they're fine with a brand participating. However, the participation can't just be hashtag activism. It has to have a real piece to it. And the number one issue for that group of consumers right now is race relations. It is more important to them than COVID. That is the number one conversation. And it is so strong that probably it is hard not to have a position there. That not to have a position and not to then, solidify that position with some sort of action or behavior is tricky.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think it's important to think, if you come back to this idea that you always want to be adding something and giving people something of value, right? And let that be your North Star, and really think about that each time. Like, if we post this, does it actually help in some way or not? And then don't do it if the answer is not,
Right. I have a question for both of you, which is in something that Gabriella brought up that I think definitely resonates with us, which is that emotional storytelling can be very, very sticky, especially in digital. And we've definitely seen that in videos and content that we make. That's kind of our bread and butter. And what we always, when we're talking to brands, it's something we always bring up. And when do you guys think is a good time for a brand to choose emotional storytelling over other lenses to do storytelling through, like infotainment or comedy or motion graphics or something like that? Like, when and why would it be a good time to do an emotional storytelling marketing campaign?
Well, I think you can have emotion in humor and humanity in humor. I think the thing that's important is to understand that people, the way they make decisions and the way they form thoughts, it is based in how they emotionally respond to something. And so maybe it's not just that it's emotional the way we think very traditionally emotional, but that they have an emotional reaction. And that emotional reaction can be joy. It can be humor. It can be God. And laughing can feel great in a situation where it has been so stressful. But it's understanding that just coming at somebody fact will wash over them.
Yeah, I think I would say that emotion should be underlying all the content that in other words, how you emotionally engage your audience, how this piece of content is going to emotionally engage your audience, how it's going to connect with them on an emotional level should always be guiding what you're doing. And no matter what kind of content you're creating. And I would say, we work with a lot of B2B brands, and I did at the Post as well. And people sometimes think in that sphere that emotion doesn't have a part of it, right? It's just for the consumer brands.
Right.
It's definitely not true, right? Like when we're working with the B2B brands, when we create content that connects with people emotionally, it does better. And the more it connects with them emotionally, the better it does. So you want to kind of like think about your audience and what are they dealing with, and then connect with them on that at an emotional level. Whether you're doing even an infographic can be emotional. I feel like that's a little bit of a false choice between emotion and doing content that's more like data-based or stat-based or fact-based.
Well, right. You can take there's a great infographic that Bill Maher voices around the differences between the way football finance works and baseball finance. I mean, very dry, very statistics, but it ultimately taps into how people feel about teams, how people feel about competitive situations, how they feel about wanting a good game. And so it's interesting. That's a purely infographic, but it's fun, but you remember it. It's sticky because it hits something in you, how you feel about sport, how you feel about a team.
I guess a better question would have been, how do you miss? Because when you were giving that example like of emotional, and I totally agree with you that there can be emotion in all different kinds of videos, doesn't matter what the format is or what the delivery method is, but like, how do you miss? What does a miss look like?
Or it's mawkish or fake. I mean, if you think about the Kendall Jenner, was it Kendall Jenner in the Pepsi thing where she was trying to play, like it was like, that doesn't seem real. I mean, it just didn't work because it was fake. It wasn't authentic. It has to come from a real place.
Yeah, and I would say if it doesn't start with what your audience is caring about and feeling and connecting there before you get to what the brand is trying to achieve, then you've lost your audience. Like I was just working on a promo for a B2B podcast. This is for a enterprise tech company, right? So very B2B, very technical, very complex. And their audience is tech decision makers inside enterprise organizations. This is as B2B as it gets, right? So, but when I was writing the promo, this is like for social media, a little video to promote the podcast episode. I started with what's going on with these businesses right now, like what has been happening in the past few months that's keeping them up at night. Before I got into like, okay, we're going to talk about how technology can tackle these kinds of challenges in this podcast episode. First, I started with just literally listing what's keeping these executives up at night. So I think if you don't do that, if I just gone straight into this podcast is going to do this, that would have been a miss.
Right.
And kind of keeping in line with this B2B idea and thinking, that content can't be as emotional as it could be with a B2B audience. I'm wondering about how that works with your platform selection. Do you find when you're working with a B2B client, are you really hammering LinkedIn home, or are you trying to build a different kind of presence on Instagram or even leaning into a TikTok or that type of thing? Or are you really just focusing on more of these traditional B2B platforms?
I mean, LinkedIn's always going to be important in the B2B space, but I mean, we do quite a lot on Twitter as well. And there are certain B2B brands that are foraying more into Instagram. TikTok, that's maybe a new frontier for the B2B world, but maybe it should start going there. That would be fun.
Every platform has a different purpose, but remember that the decision makers at companies, and they're ultimately in a B2B situation, there's a human who's making a decision, and that human exists in the world. And so it's understanding that when they're on LinkedIn, they're in work mode and they're on LinkedIn so that you can speak in a certain way. But that person is also liable to be on Twitter, or that person is also liable to be on Instagram. So it's how you speak to them on that platform that has to fit with the platform, why they're there, what they expect on that platform, what they want. So it isn't jarring. Every platform has a purpose. You can't simply take the video that you put together for one place and blow it out across all the platforms, because it's simply, that isn't how we'll absorb the information. And so understanding the platform, understanding how it works, understanding why somebody might be there, for instance, it might be a B2B conversation, but that B is there because their C is on that platform. And so they're checking out the platform. So you can talk to them in that way. It's about understanding why they're on the platform and how to address them on the platform.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's definitely one of the biggest pitfalls I see companies make when they are trying to market is they'll make a video or they'll make any kind of piece of content and they'll put it out over everything. And
right. It's not just an aspect ratio change, people.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. There's so much nuance to it. And actually it can end up hurting you more than helping you because people who are familiar with that platform, who love being on it, are going to be bothered by kind of the lack of focus that was put into the content that clearly doesn't fit.
Well, it reveals that you don't understand the platform.
Exactly.
So depending on your brand, it can be very damaging.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, we always at Greenbuzz talk about Facebook in particular, just because so many things can come up in a person's feed unsolicited. So we're be very careful with the opening of your video. It has to be, gripping, but also not jarring to somebody who's just scrolling through their feed.
Right.
Well, that was awesome. I think we covered a lot here today, and I think now would be a good time to transition over into the final aspects here. To everyone who joined us, thanks for stopping by. We hope that you guys got some great insights that you can bring back to your teams. And be on the lookout for our next webinar featuring Jessica Nordlander, the COO of Thought Exchange. We're going to be chatting about the balance between exploration and exploitation in creative content with tons of hands-on takeaways. So we hope to see everyone there. And just another reminder that you guys can check out greenbuzzagency.com/blog to see the on-demand recordings of any of our previous episodes, including this one. And then finally, of course, an enormous thank you to Annie and Gabriella for joining us today. You guys are the best. Thank you for joining everybody else, and we will see you all next week.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.